Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Catherine. I would now like to introduce your first speaker for today, Lori Teleshak. Lori, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you, Catherine, and welcome everyone. Welcome to How Next Gen Contingent Workforce Leaders are Driving Strategic Change, sponsored by Worksome. So there has been a lot of buzz around this hot topic of Next Gen programs, and really this can mean something different for every program. So today, no matter what stage your program's in, we're going to take a deep dive into how to launch, into how to relaunch, or even innovate a next-gen contingent workforce program. Our guests today here, they are super passionate about this topic and they have some great experience to share with us. Our hope is that by the end of our time today, you feel more comfortable and more confident to lead your program through a next-gen transformation. And without further ado, I would like to extend a very big thank you to the sponsors of today's webinar, Worksome and special guest Snowflake. So joining us, we have Morten Bruun, SVP of Revenue for Worksome. We also have Natalie, Head of Global Contingent Workforce with Snowflake. And Natalie, and then Morten, I'll kick it over to you. Can you share a little bit about your role and really what Next Gen, what does this topic mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. So I manage the Global Contingent Snowforce program for Snowflake. Yes, I said Snowforce and not Workforce, just calling that out because we've branded the program at Snowflake as the Contingent Snowforce. Our program had 4 service offerings today that we deliver to the business. And then really, what comes to mind when I think of Next Gen is I think of a program that already has a solid foundation, buy-in from leadership and key stakeholders. And really, once you have that in place, you can start thinking about and implementing advanced strategies, technologies, and practices to enhance the efficiency, flexibility, hopefully cost effectiveness of your program, and the ability of engaging and managing contingent workers within your organization. So that's what comes to mind for me, Lori.
Thank you. I love Snowforce. Cool. Very good. Yeah. Morten, can you give us a little bit of insight?
Yeah, sure. I definitely love the Snowforce name as well. So yeah, my name is Morten from Worksome. Before joining Worksome, I spent some time at McKinsey, and then before McKinsey, I spent some time at Google. So I've always been sort of like a little bit in the intersection between problem solving and then technology. And I think at Worksome, I'm quite fortunate to actually get to do a bit of both. So we're essentially a technology company that uses technology to solve problems within the contingent workforce space. So we're an external workforce management platform. And I think what's quite sort of unique, if you at least look at our clients, we very much work with clients that either use a lot of ICs, so they're really sort of dependent on bringing in individuals into the organizations and more rely on like individual people. So typically it's like consultancies or advertising networks. And then the other type of clients that we have is really like innovative companies, right? So either large companies that want to innovate an existing program or companies that are building out a first-gen program for the first time. So really excited about the chat today. And thanks to everyone for joining.
Yes, thank you. Well, we appreciate both of you, Morten and Natalie. Thank you for being here. And today we also have FAA's very own Workforce Solutions Technology Analyst, Cindy Chun. So Cindy, can you kick it off? Can you share with us a little bit about your background and what Next Gen means to you, or what comes to mind when you think of a Next Gen contingent workforce program?
Hi, everyone. Cindy Chun with FIA. My whole job at FIA is to look at workforce solutions technology. We do that in the way of certain surveys throughout the year. In fact, we have one out right now on a DMS global landscape survey, and we do different ones throughout the year, and that allows us to look and see what's out there in the marketplace and what the differentiators are. My background is staffing as well as VMS. I worked for an actual VMS technology for almost 10 years. So in implementation, program management, an analyst role as far as business intelligence. And I think Next Gen for me is just both what Natalie and Morten said, having that executive sponsor, having the right people in place to either or create additional efficiencies to one that you already have, but also taking those blend with strategic services with a next gen technology that can handle those. And you're going to hear a lot over, I think, the next year or so, what that tech stack should look like or what that ecosystem looks like. And I think when you blend those two things, it does help to have success in your workforce program.
Thank you, Cindy. And we are looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that research. So before we dive into that, so Morton, let's set the scene. So from your point of view, why is now the time to reimagine contingent workforce program? And what's really driving this sense of urgency that we're hearing to revamp the current contingent workforce program model?
Right. That's a super good question. And I think it's like, it's a fun thing, right? Because you sort of, we've seen the rise of the future of work for quite a while. So it obviously begs the question of like, why is that particularly now is so interesting? So brought along a couple of data points that at least like shape the way that we think about this. So, first of all, we've just seen like a big rise, both within contingent workforce in general. And I think that's quite natural when you're in a period where there's lots of change, whether it's COVID or recession or whatnot. You want to enable your organization to be agile and flexible, be able to basically shift the focus of the organization to where it's most needed. So that's one thing that we've seen. The other thing that we've seen is that there's a big rise in essentially individual contractors. So you see that, there's a prediction from Forbes that around like 90 million contractors is a number that we're sort of aiming at in the US by 2028. That's up by 33 million from 2017. So I think we've also seen this shift where like more individuals are looking to make a career for themselves as individual contractors or freelancers, both through the Great Resignation, and now we're going through maybe a period of layoffs, and we saw the same during COVID. So I think that's one thing to really keep in mind, that there's a quite seismic shift, not only towards contingent in general, but also within the contingent space. There's a sort of really radical shift towards more individuals. So I think if you go to the next slide, Lori, I think the interesting thing is that if you on the one hand side have this huge trend of sort of shift within the contingent workforce, the other thing that we see is that the existing solutions out there are not really like great at solving the problem. So I think a stat that I remember from last year's CWS was that around like 80% of CWS attendees are using a VMS, which, by all means, and in many, many years have been the most sort of sophisticated piece of technology that you can apply to really manage your contingent workforce. But still we see that more than half actually don't think that it's sort of doing the job anymore, or at least it's not sort of like cutting edge to some of the trends that we're seeing. So if you go to the next slide, we see that a large number of the contingent workforce leaders out there are now in the market looking for solutions to this problem. So like, what are the new platforms or new technologies that I want to apply? And I think, if you're in this webinar, you've probably been in other webinars where it talks about direct sourcing or talent platforms or all these new technologies that's coming into the market. So I think if you zoom out, I really struggle to find a more interesting time to be a contingent workforce leader right now, because you on the one hand side has this like seismic shift towards more contingent workforce, but also shift to a different type of contingent workers. And then on the other hand side, you also have this realization that we need new platforms and new technologies to help us enable this shift. So I think we're really faced with an enormous opportunity at the moment.
Oh my gosh, exciting time. That is for sure, Morton. That's a good way of putting it. So Cindy, can you take us through some of the research and some of the data that SIA is showing on some of these trends?
Sure. So we talked a little earlier about the surveys that we do. This was actually a buyer survey that we conducted, and we asked 4 key questions. This was 133 different companies that were asked. And if you look all the way to the right, you're going to see the strongly agree. So these are the people that we feel like they've moved to the next level. But if you look at the first one, we asked them, are your overall practices workforce leading? Are you on the cutting edge? Only 11% strongly agreed with that statement. A little bit more in the neither agree or disagree. That could be down. Not really sure. I may not know what really next gen looks like, so I'm not sure if we're there or not. And then some, that were kind of like, yeah, I agree. But if you look, 26% said that they disagree. They somewhat disagree that they're not where they want to be. We also asked them about the ability to attract talent in the contingent workforce. 21% they strongly agree we can attract the talent we need. We have what we want. 38% somewhat agreed. Another high number there in the middle. And then the ability to retain that talent once it's in their workforce program, is that a competitive edge for them? A little higher number of years. So I feel like people, once they get the contingent workforce, they feel strongly that they're able to give them work that's meaningful, and they're able to retain that talent. And then what do you feel about your ROI in your contingent labor? And what's interesting about this is, if you look, all the big numbers are to the right. So we already see that our buyers agree that there is a huge ROI. Contingent workforce within their company is a vital part. So now we just need to work on the three above that, of making them more cutting edge, getting to that next gen, looking at our tech stack, and moving everybody a little bit closer to that somewhat agree and strongly agree. So they're going to continue purchasing. They see the ROI for contingent labor. So now it's on our contingent workforce leaders to figure out what that looks like for each client and what success looks like. We also did a net promoter score with that as well. And we looked at a lot of different platforms, and we said, how likely are you to recommend these suppliers that you have to a friend or colleague? And actually staffing agencies came out fared a lot better. And then when you get into some of the actual technology pieces like VMS, job boards, ATS, they're a little less thrilled with what's going on there. So with VMS kind of being that hub of contingent labor, luckily with all these new ecosystem partners coming in, hopefully we'll be able to raise some of those net promoter scores and really sit with our clients, decide what they're looking for, what they need, what are they trying to fill, and work towards success with them. And then we always recognize the contingent workforce ecosystem. And when you look smack that in the middle, it's where it all began. Think about it. I can remember when I first started, we were still getting orders of our fast from some of our clients. But I'd tell you a little bit about where we started with that whole temporary staffing, the whole place and search. And now you look at the different things in the ecosystem that a workforce manager has to do on a daily basis. That we have to look at the process and figure out how we interact with our RPO. Do we have an MSP? Are we running the program internally? We've got to look at payrolling. We've got to be compliant. We need to mitigate all the risks for the workers that are out there. How do we directly engage with our workers? For so long, people were to say, I want them to think they work here, so I have to be careful how I communicate with them, all the way to what's the actual technology now that we're using to get direct to check faster, and then on other workforce solutions. And I think we'll start to see some of that move out, especially as AI comes into play. I think we may end up having to take another little piece of the pie as that starts to move in and change what our workforce ecosystem looks like.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. That was some great data. And I think if anything, it's just showing how much room for growth and expansion that we have within our programs, which is really exciting. So before we move into the core content of this webinar, we'd like to open a quick poll. We really want to get a quick pulse check on where our audience currently sits with this and why we're doing that. I'm going to ask you to answer, so what phase is your program currently in? And pick the one that most identifies with the position that your program is currently in. So whether you're launching a first-gen program, you're currently just rethinking, playing around with ways to innovate your current contingent workforce program, or if you're currently in the process of relaunching or have launched a next-gen program. And while we're getting your answers, Morton, I do have a question for you. So based on Cindy's data, so programs are out there. Clearly, they're not happy. They're searching for new technology. They're looking for a new strategy. So how is Worksome helping programs level up to next gen?
Sure. Well, so I mean, and I'm sure we can dive into this later as well with Natalie's perspective here too. But I think the challenging thing is, like, a lot of these programs are quite well established, right? So, you have a VMS and an MSP, and, you have a number of providers. On the one hand side, you want to not sort of like, just tear it all up and sort of disrupt that massively, but you also want to bring in innovation to the program. So I think we see a lot of our clients really trying to, have a type of like hybrid approach or innovate, especially among like larger enterprise clients, innovate within part of their business. So they might take out like a specific team. It could be, for instance, the marketing team or whatever, and then try to innovate around that use case. So I think really like finding a strong business use case within the organization, finding like a sort of contained area where you can try to innovate, and then use that a little bit as a stepping stone to bring wider innovation to the program. That's what we've seen quite a bit of.
Thanks for it. And while we're closing out the call, Natalie, where did you begin your journey with this?
Yeah, so our program actually next month, we will be 2 years old. And when I started at Snowflake a few years ago, really there was nothing in place. And so in under a year, we implemented a global MSP and VMS. And we really, the driver behind that was to ensure the business could acquire contingent talent seamlessly, compliantly, and cost effectively. And so building any, contingent workforce program, but a first gen program, it's an iterative process. And we're continuously learning from our experiences, innovating, Morten was saying, and then adapting, to the changing needs and market dynamics. So the business within Snowflake and the world is constantly changing, as we know, and hence the reason for innovation. And so we're always looking at our program and ways in which we can scale up, where we can do better, where we can change. And so that's a little bit about where the journey started at Snowflake and how we challenge ourselves and where we would like to go.
Thanks, Natalie. So I'm looking at these poll results, and I think a lot of folks are in the right place. So we have the majority of our participants that are currently in that rethinking phase of looking for ideas of how to innovate their current programs and what to do next. So I'm hoping this webinar is very timely for these people. So let's get into it. So it seems like, we're excited, we're ready to take this next steps towards becoming a next gen program. So Natalie, what is your advice on, where do we begin? So where do these programs get started? They're thinking about it, they're ready to get started, but not sure where to start or what to prioritize, where they can get the most bang for their buck. Start now.
Yeah. My advice would be understanding the specific needs, goals, and challenges of your organization. You need to be able to identify how contingent workers can support those objectives and contribute to the overall business strategy. You'd have to engage with key stakeholders within your organization and across the different departments to gain insights and build consensus around your program's objectives. As experts in the industry, we really do know a lot. And I think what can be hard for us is building programs for what our organization needs today and anticipating what they're going to need 1 year, 3 years, 5 years down the line. And so if we're building based on what we've always done and not for what our organization needs today or tomorrow or down the line, we're going to become irrelevant to the business. So we lose that opportunity to be seen as a strategic partner that understands how to look at all the moving parts and discern what needs to be built, offered to meet those business needs, goals, and solve for the challenges your organization is facing.
Wow, Natalie, that really resonates when you say build for the program of tomorrow, not today's need. Thank you. That was a great tip. Morten, anything to add?
I completely agree. I think it's one of the most sort of both challenging but also like exciting parts of being in a position like Natalie and probably many people on this call, is that you actually have a pretty sort of like wide surface of stakeholders and lots of like problems to dive into. So I really agree that both like understanding, what are the different stakeholders really looking for, but also what's the overall goal of the business. I think sometimes like it's easy to find yourself a little bit like paralyzed about like, speaking to legal about one thing and finance about another and TA about a third thing. So I think really having, the business objective as your North Star when you're navigating, a transformation like this can be super helpful.
Thank you. North Star. I agree. Cindy, do you mind taking us through this QBCR framework a little bit?
Yeah. So this is the performance management framework. These are things to keep in mind whether you're starting with your first program or you're moving into this next gen world. It's good to kind of keep these frameworks in mind, and as you start to make the changes, answering these questions of, is it the quality product? Is it going to produce exactly what we want it to do? How we identify our issues that we're trying to solve for, and is this going to produce quality? Then it's going to drive efficiencies. We're always looking for ways to bring talent in faster. So when you're looking next gen or first gen, You want to make sure that it's going to be efficient. It's going to drive efficiencies. You want people to adapt. And if it's not efficient, you're probably going to get low adoption. So we want to make sure that you're looking at quality and efficiency and cost. Is it cost effective? Is it cost prohibitive? What's the ROI on this? And we know we can't always measure cost, and it's not just the hard dollars cost. There's cost savings in bringing in talent much quicker. Not limiting work, staying on track, and those types of things. So make sure that when you're looking at cost, it's just not always about the line of the dollar amount. There are other things that you need to take into account. And then risk. What things around risk? What's the risk if we change? But what's the risk if we don't change? So looking at that way is important as well. So I think if you kind of keep these frameworks in mind as you're working through your solution and asking those questions of yourself and the team, it makes it go much smoother, and you can see an ROI or that light at the end of the tunnel a little sooner sometimes.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. And this is a great tool to use when you're looking at your initiatives of where it's going to impact quality, efficiency, cost, and risk, and how what moving forward in one area might impact another one. So it's definitely a great tool to use. Thank you. Okay, so with any implementation, strategic change, buy-in is such a critical component. So Natalie, when you were getting started, how did you gain buy-in from those strategic players? So that would be either your C-suite, HR, procurement, and what challenges, advice, anything that you might do different that you can share with our audience today?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my current role, I kind of got lucky because the company was already looking for a subject matter expert to come in and build the program from scratch. So I had that buy-in from HR and procurement. However, I still had to build relationships with other key stakeholders across the organization that I was really going to have to work with during implementation, and then once the program was built, to maintain our program. And then also to get buy-in from managers and leaders who was going to be utilizing our program to support them. So in addition to understanding the organization's specific goals and needs and challenges, and that's always where, I look to start, I wanted to make sure I had an effective communication strategy in place with all of the key stakeholders across the organization so that they could understand our program's purpose, benefits, and impact. And then, of course, creating that business case, right, that shows the benefits, costs, and how we're going to reduce risk and, anything that's really associated with a contingent workforce program. So those were just some of the things that I did. And really, one thing that I see, and this is just consistent in any program that didn't get strong buy-in to begin with, sometimes you have to do a little bit of damage control. And you have to really be ready, if that's the case, to listen and offer solutions that will enable the business to get things done. So that's ultimately what the business wants from us, right? Like they have things that they need to get done, and they just want help getting it over the finish line. So just be prepared to listen and learn if you didn't have that buy-in and you didn't have people who understood the value and what, the impact that your program could make.
Yeah, thank you. So now they're interested to hear, what do you think is the most important thing for program leaders to keep in mind when building this business case for a next generation program? I think a lot of people are probably in that stage right now.
Yeah, I think, so it's really, you've got to be able to outline the benefits for your organization and align it with the organization's overall goals. How does that fit in? How will this, save on cost? What are the risks, again, like I said, if you don't do this? And then I just keep going back to aligning with your organization's goals and how your program can enhance flexibility, improve scalability. And, when you secure that executive sponsorship support, they'll back you. And if you can align it to something that they're passionate about, then that's how you get that support. And then really you just have to be able to present that clear value proposition in order to gain that executive support and have people back you.
Absolutely. Morgan, anything you want to add to that?
I think it's really good point, and I also think the sort of point about how you're dealing with multiple stakeholders, and each stakeholder will have their own perspective on what the business case looks like, right? If you're speaking with finance and procurement, they're going to be very much focused on the dollars. If you're speaking about HR, they're probably focused on the ability to attract and retain talent. So I think also varying your communication style and your communication plans depending on who are the different stakeholders that you're trying to get on board. I think one thing that I've also seen is, obviously it's always very powerful when you can bring a sort of dollar amount to the table and quantify how much are you saving. I think another aspect that I often sort of have seen in successful business cases have also been if you're able to bring in something that's more qualitative, quotes or a statement from different leaders in the organization. So we recently did an RI case together with a client where some of the quotes that we got was just so powerful. It was we had this hiring manager who was talking about how she was not able to, she had lost specific talent because it took them a month to get someone on board. And I think that's something where whether you're finance or in TA or HR or procurement or whatever, you can see that that's an issue. If you're an organization that cares about talent, for instance, if you're losing talent because the process is too long or too frustrating, it's just not going to drive any great business outcomes. So I think also being able to mix a little bit, some hardcore numbers that people can put into an Excel sheet and look at and justify the business case, but then also have some almost real life stories for people that are working with contingent workers in and out every day. And what are some of the frustrations they're seeing? I think that it goes a long way in getting that buy-in.
Oh, absolutely. Sharing those success stories, hitting those pain points, making them feel the pain a little bit. Absolutely. So how do we go about measuring success in the ROI that we were talking about of the next gen launch? Natalie, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, measuring the ROI of a next gen contingent workforce program requires a comprehensive assessment, having showing those financial savings, what those numbers are, quantifying that, how it's going to improve productivity, any other relevant metrics that you can share. It's really going to be essential that you customize the measurement and approach, obviously based on your organization's needs and objectives, and try to align when you can with industry benchmarks so that you can have a meaningful evaluation for your program, showing and demonstrating your program's success. And then I think I like, Morten, you said it a little bit ago about the manager and their inability to find talent. But in this case, is being able to showcase success stories, right? Highlighting those success stories and positive outcomes resulting from your contingent workforce program. And so being able to share those stories are very powerful and they go a long way.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's a super good point. And, I think there's some things that I've seen have been, maybe a bit overlooked, or at least coming more into sort of the light when we look at some of the RI studies that we've seen with our clients, which is also around things for instance, adoption in the organization. Typically you'll find that if you're in finance or legal, you're very concerned about the process and the risk aspects. And those are typically things that can be a little bit harder to quantify in certain ways. But I think one thing that has worked quite well for a number of our clients have been to look at, are our hiring managers actually embracing this new process and technology? Because ultimately we want to empower and enable, the business, the hiring managers and the end users of these technologies that we're bringing in. So they're being adopted. Do they follow the process? That goes a long way in reducing the risk. And I think as you highlighted just before, Cindy, with NPS scores, a sort of decent NPS score is plus 20. So when we're seeing maybe minus 50 for the as an average for most of the technologies, that's just not going to drive adoption, neither by hiring managers or the talent itself. So I think there's a big sort of trend that we see right now, which is really this focus on can we actually drive adoption within the organization, because that's going to trickle down to how you're able to reduce the risk, how you're able to enable hiring managers to take smarter and better decisions, how you enable them to access the talent that they need, but also, finding talent that is not overpriced or, so there's many different ways where I think, especially when you're dealing with technology, it comes very much down to, are the users that we're trying to empower here that actually using these technologies?
Oh, yeah. And adoption, that is so critical because if you don't have adoption, you're not going to have much to measure. So that's an extremely, extremely good point. So you talked a little bit about this with adoption and getting people to use these programs. And I think a huge piece of that is, and you're hearing more and more about this today, is a program's branding and that user experience is becoming so important. It's becoming increasingly more and more important. So Morton, how can technology help elevate this talent experience and brand recognition and hopefully help with adoption?
And I think this is probably like the thing that where there's the biggest risk of underestimating it, right? Because when we look at this radical shift, there's the important aspect that at least I tend to come back to a lot is that, we've essentially shifted a little bit away from dealing with, large scale staffing vendors, which still like makes up a big part of the contingent workforce today and will continue to do so for a while. But we've seen this like influx of individual and independent people coming into the organization as part of the contingent workforce. And I think we really embrace that shift. You also got to rethink what is the experience that you're optimizing for, right? Because, when you're dealing with a large number of vendors, they are really also there to ensure that the talent is getting a great experience, and they, do a lot of work in order to make that happen. But when you're dealing with people directly, you all of a sudden have to embrace that now it's just you and them. And it's you that they're looking to for this experience. They're making the choices about which companies that they want to join. So I think the whole experience aspect is probably one of the biggest shift that we see here is this focus on talent experience. And I think you can see that in a lot of the new technologies that are coming out as well. It's that they're really doubling down on creating a great experience, almost wanting it to be like, the same experience if you're using like, pick your favorite app, whether it's Uber or Airbnb or whatever. It needs to be that easy because, an individual who's becoming a graphic designer, they dream about being able to do graphic design full time. That's what they want to do. Being in like, systems and thrown around between different processes and having to sort of, accept a clunky way of working that might work for a large scale vendor that's bringing people in by the truckload quite literally. But if you're dealing with like a graphic designer or a software engineer, they're not gonna accept if it takes like again a month to onboard someone or they need to switch between 10 different systems. They're used to using systems that are really intuitive for them to use, and they're gonna expect the same for you. And if you're not able to deliver that experience, they're likely not gonna work with you.
Yeah, the expectations are certainly shifting. Cindy, as our SIA resident technical expert, what are you saying? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the whole point is for a long time when you look at the contingent workforce, we looked at the vendor, started with the client, we looked at the vendor, and then we looked at some type of technology. And it kind of left out the candidate for a long time. So we never thought about how does the candidate want to approach this type of work? Does he want to go on an app and see, 10 job listings and say, that's the one that speaks to me? I'm going to apply to that one. So I think Martin's right. We really have to look. I think the client themselves need to have a positive brand out there already because that's the first attraction. If you can't say I want to work for, company A and they're the top in their field and I can't come in on the permanent, where do I fit in contingent? What does that look like? And how do I get there? The brand has already attracted me. I want to work for this company. I don't necessarily need to do it in the traditional format. So we're going to have to look at ways in the technology to speak directly to our candidates. And then I think I think I said this a lot one time, like, when's the last time you pick up the phone and order a pizza? No, you don't want to call and talk to somebody. You can do it right on your app. It's how they want to look at work. Do they want to look at it like, since it's easy as ordering food from Uber Eats, that's the job. That fits me. I want that job. They press a button, they apply, and immediately, depending on what type of that technology is, they're getting a positive interaction versus maybe, applying to a job site, getting a thank you. We're going to have to look at how we communicate with that talent, how we for them work, and how we keep them warm until we need that candidate. And I think technology is going to play a huge role in that. And then it already is. We're going to see even more positive change within the next 12 to 24 months.
Sure. And how many candidates are you missing out on that?
Right.
If I opt out halfway through a clunky process, I think it's also using something interesting to get some stats on. And I think we'd be remiss if we were talking about program branding and didn't mention something about D&I. So Natalie, I'd be really interested to hear how you feel D&I plays a role in this and maybe what Snowflake has done with its program.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about, how DE&I plays a role in it. So individuals from those underrepresented groups have a positive experience with their contingent workforce program. That sends a message that your organization values diversity and inclusion. And really that can lead then to increased representation of diverse talent within your program and then contribute to a more inclusive work environment for everybody. And then also, one of the things that we look at Snowflake is, our program is a feeder for full-time talent. We have a pretty high conversion percentage. So, if we're bringing in diverse talent through our program, then that's going to lead to, obviously it's increasing diversity within Snowflake, but when they become a full-time employee and if they have a good experience and they felt included, they're going to want to stay if and when the time, comes for it. So also, it fosters that word of mouth referral for anybody who's having a positive experience with your program. And so that can really expand your organization's talent pools and help with attracting a broader range of candidates from diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, thank you. So, Morton, can you give us just some highlights on the current state of contingent workforce technology, how we can leverage some of this technology to help streamline these clunky processes and make it a better experience for everyone?
Yeah, for sure. I think the data points here on the right-hand side, I think is quite illustrated, right? That you see that almost like all of C-level people within the organization, I believe that they have great technology in place and it's just working splendidly. When you then actually ask like the staff who's supposed to use it, only half of them would agree to that. And I think I can see that there's a question as well from Jen about the positive client experience as well. And I think those really goes hand in hand, right? Because you obviously have the risk of losing talent, and that definitely happens out there. I think the more sort of realistic case, which not a lot of people talk about, but it's almost like this shadow population that we have within the contingent workforce. So just the data point that I want to throw out there is that we generally see that somewhere around 10 to 20% of the contingent workforce population lives outside of the program. And that's because, if you don't give a great experience to the talent, but also not to the end users, it's not like they're just going to, throw their hands up in the air and say, well, that's just bad luck, then we can't hire this person. Probably just going to go ahead with it anyways and sort of circumvent the processes. And we see that quite a lot. So those 10 and 20%, they really live outside these programs. And that's a mix of it not meeting the expectations of the talent or meeting the expectations of the hiring managers. So when you have this population living outside, that obviously exposes you to a great deal of, again, risk and, missed opportunities for bringing really everything into sort of a single platform or single ecosystem where you can better manage it. So I think when you think about, what then good looks like, it is really also to Cindy's point, think about what is intuitive to use? What are some of the everyday platforms and technologies that you use that you enjoy using? And you will probably find that they look very different from some of the technologies that we work with in the contingent workforce space. And I think that gap's going to close. So we're going to see technologies that feels intuitive, that are able to present you with a sort of single user experience end to end. And there's something that's very robust, right? So I think you get that almost as a product of this. If you're able to have a platform that people actually use, if you're able to have a platform that are able to tie and integrate together different processes, then you actually do get sort of this, ecosystem that's almost too good to believe, but where you have data and insights and you can actually make really, really smart decisions. So I think that has a long time been sort of the dream, but I think it's actually a dream that's quite realistic right now. So I think that's quite exciting.
That is. Cindy, anything to add?
Yeah, I think you said it really well. It just goes back to we're going to have to listen to the candidate and how they want to perceive work and how we're going to be able to make work attractive to them. And I think we always talk about a talent marketplace. I think they're looking to us as a job marketplace. They're you want a place to go buy all this different type of talent that fits your needs. We want the same. We want to look at a workplace and find what we need from them as well. So I think we will see some changes in technology that will allow our candidates to drive how they want to work. And I think it'll be positive experience for both the client and the candidate.
Sure, definitely. Natalie, anything you wanted to chime in on?
I mean, not too much. I really think Cindy and Morton, you guys said it perfectly. I do think, we're being asked to do more with less. And so we do need systems we need automation. We need those API integrations to work. We need to be able to streamline these processes and, get away from some of these manual things that we might be doing, but also increasing, obviously, that experience for the contingent workers, for the business. And, for me, I always think about our staffing partners as well. So looking at that entire ecosystem and making sure everyone is happy with the technology. It's easy to use. So that's all. Nothing more to add.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I have to say that this all sounds fabulous. I'm excited. I'm ready to go. But unfortunately, I have been watching the news and there is a lot of uncertainty out there. So how do we push this tech agenda through an economic downturn? Is this possible? Natalie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to show the ROI for pushing a tech agenda and why spending today could potentially help save down the line. Some organizations may also be experiencing an increase in bandwidth due to some of the downturn, projects being put on hold, whatever that might be. And if that's the case for your organization, you could potentially use this time to implement or improve your organization's tech stack. So those are just my thoughts on it.
I think it's so interesting also, like, to your point there, and be like, when we sort of look at a crisis, right? The only thing that's uncertain in a crisis is that it isn't going to last forever, right? So there's another side as well, where you come out and you are sort of again back in like crunch mode and you see growth as well. So it tends to be so that, when you are sitting in the middle of a crisis and looking at it, everything feels like uncertainty and risk. And then when you're on the other side of it and you look back, everything looked like it was opportunity for changing something, right? So I think that's really like spot on. And I think it's never waste a good crisis, right? So I think it is an opportunity to actually take a look at things and try and see if you can do something that's, more transformative, maybe taking a little bit more risk. I think you're absolutely right that, the dollars are definitely what's on everyone's mind at the moment. So, you definitely can't get away with anything if it doesn't have an ROI. But I actually think that's a very healthy discipline to have anyways, and I think it really goes a long way in making sure that the contingent workforce team is being seen as a team that's, there to drive efficiency and there to drive business outcomes as well as financial outcomes as well. I think that's actually a quite strong position to be in.
Yeah. Never waste a good crisis. Morton, dropping some life lessons, life advice for us.
I'm writing that down, Martin.
Me too. Thank you. So Natalie, we're seeing this accelerated shift, which we talked about in the way organizations are getting work done or planning to get work done, and there's a greater focus on the contingent workforce. So how can leaders position themselves to really gain a seat at the table so they can become more strategic with their organizations?
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record because I think I've said this throughout the entire webinar. So, I mean, it kind of goes back to understanding your organization's needs, right? And having and what the business strategy is within your organization. So if you can gain a deep understanding of the overall business strategy of your organization, that's going to go a long way. And then, that includes, again, knowing those goals, objectives, and challenges that the company's facing. And then you align your program to the broader organizational goals. It's building relationships. So establish strong relationships, like we said, with the key stakeholders and decision makers within your organization. You'll be collaborating with HR, finance, procurement, and other departments. And really, we have to, Morton, you touched on it earlier, tailoring what we're discussing with them to meet their specific needs, right? And we forget that we're salespeople. Part of our role, in a sense, right, we have to understand what motivates people, but we also have to be able to, figure out what those motivations are and then position ourselves in a way that is going to make them want to come along for the journey with us. And so communicate regularly with those executives. And then also, I would just add, there's so many things I could add, but lastly is education and raising awareness. I don't think a lot of executives really understand the full potential of a contingent workforce program, or the challenges associated with managing it effectively. So it's our responsibility to educate and raise awareness around the strategic importance of contingent workforce. Share those industry trends, share the case studies, best practices, and showcase the value that we really bring to the organizations. That's our job, our role, and how we can help ourselves get a seat at the strategic table.
Thanks, Natalie. So I'm bought in. I'm ready to go. Morten, I'm leaning on you. What's next?
Well, so, I think if you're leaning on me, you're out of luck, right? So that's not a good start. But no, I think, to Natalie's point, right, the way to make this come together is really to be able to bring in a lot of people from different disciplines and work with the stakeholders. And so I think, the bad news is that if you're working as a contingent workforce manager, you probably have the hardest job in the world. And I've never done it, so I have a ton of respect for people who actually do it. I do think that the exciting part of it is that a lot of the benefits that you're able to bring to the table, if you go through the transformation, like it seems like 80% of the people here are looking into, is that you can actually accomplish a lot of different goals. So I think also as you look at these 9 different benefits that we've listed out there, you can almost like see these and sort of put the faces of your CFO and your procurement officer and your HR team on each one of those, whether it's bottom line and cost efficiency, or whether it's employer brand or the experience, or whether it's being able to source talent directly and solve problems for the hiring manager. So I won't go through these one by one, but we'll make sure to share this afterwards. And I think they give a pretty good steer when it comes to being able to actually, look at this from the different functions angle and then see what will really make your CFO really excited about it. So I think a lot of these should be quite exciting for a lot of people in the organization. I think if you go to the next slide, a lot of it obviously comes down to how do you then actually put this into practice. And I think we've talked more or less about all of these things. So, the first part is really what I think you put really well, Natalie, around, defining what's the business outcome and who are the people that you need to get on board. It's the first phase that you go through. Then the second phase, you try to really essentially split that out at some different types of sub goals, some metrics that you wanna achieve. And then lastly, create a program that has the user in mind, right? And I think that's really the core thing when you're working with technology, is making sure that you're designing something that obviously works for the different functions, be it legal as a user, finance as a user, but also design it for the people that are going to use it day in and day out. And those are the hiring managers that are trying to hire someone and the people that would want to come work for you. So I think those 3 different phases is typically how we really break it out.
Thank you. So Natalie, take us on.
All right, let's do it. So really, there's so many ways contingent workforce leaders can be thinking about making our programs next gen. These are my 3 top takeaways though for today. So again, going back to that comprehensive, cultivating, the slide is slightly different. So I'm just getting a little thrown up. Sorry. So cultivating those relationships, right? Having relationships with the entire ecosystem, from your external staffing agencies, your vendor partners, internal stakeholders. It's really, relationships are key, and they will take you so far. Engage in those strategic discussions, and establish clear communications channels. Fostering a culture of partnership and collaboration really will help ensure that you have access to top talent and you're maintaining a strong pipeline of talent, so your program will be seen as a strategic lever to the business. And then, of course, building a robust legal and compliance framework, that's critical. And there's so many reasons why that you need to focus on that. And then lastly, I'll just end with adapting and evolving, right? So managing our programs, it's an iterative process. Learn from your experiences, adapt to the changing needs and market dynamics, and be open to incorporating new technologies and best practices. And then I'll just end with, don't be afraid to try something new.
I think that's such a good point. I actually also think that one of my sort of big sort of battles, if I were to say, or it's almost like, there's a little bit of like an RFP regime out there where, and it's not because I don't like submitting RFPs, don't get me wrong, but I think especially as you're dealing with like technologies and you're thinking about, creating a better experience for everyone, I think part of what also sometimes goes wrong is that it ends up being this like spreadsheet exercise. I've spent most of my life in spreadsheet and I love spreadsheets, but I don't think fundamentally you can choose a good technology only through a spreadsheet. You got to see it and you got to try it out and you got to like get your hands dirty. So I also think as you're developing that business case, don't be afraid to try something out, as you clearly put it, Natalie. And I think that's especially true when it comes to technology. If you're making a technology decision based on the spreadsheet, it's almost like flipping a coin. It's going to be, maybe you're lucky, maybe you aren't. And I think you really don't know until you put your hands into it. So I think that's a super good point.
Yeah, thank you. So now time for your questions. We just have a few minutes here for questions, but I promise if you put it in the chat, we will get back to you with a response. First one I'm seeing, so how will AI impact contingent workforce programs?
Courtney, you want to take a first stab, or are you ready to go?
Yeah, I can take a first stab. Well, look, I think you kind of like have two views on it. There's definitely part of my view, which is that I think we see some really exciting use cases today already, right? I think one of the issues that you sometimes can struggle with, especially as you try to like really empower end users, is that a lot of this stuff is hard, whether it's like, writing an SOW, which we're, have started seeing technologies actually solving that. So instead of just putting in the one sentence that you would typically do, you can essentially use AI to sort of write that out for you. We've also worked a lot with using AI to do things like worker classification. So I think there are some real use cases out there for using AI to sort of to lift to do a lot of the heavy lifting. I think my sort of antithesis to that, my other view to that, is that a lot of the struggles that we have today, I don't think we necessarily need AI to solve it, to be honest. I think there are problems that we do need AI to solve, but I think a lot of the issues that we need solving are actually like fairly mundane and comes back to some of the stuff that you also talked about, Natalie, with like, how do we integrate in a good way and how to create a good experience? That's not new technology as such. And I think that's great news because we're not relying on some type of like, cutting edge technology that might be subject to regulation that we don't know about right now. I think a lot of the new platforms that we see come out in the contingent workforce space, they're awesome, but they're not awesome because of AI. They're awesome just because they're great technology that uses the same, techniques and technologies as you see Uber and Airbnb using. That's been around for like 5-10 years now. So we're actually relying on something that's truly tried and tested. I think that should actually get us quite excited. So I don't think we need to sort of rely on crypto or quantum computing or anything to solve the problems. I actually think we have solutions out there that are quite practical to use as well.
I can tell you, I think practical. It's an enhancement. It's not going to take over our technology. It's not going to. It's going to enhance the technology we already have. But I go with the old adage of remember at the core base, AI is really machine learning. So junk in, junk out. And, if you've played around with AI, you've seen some of that, I'm sure. So I think there are going to be some great enhancements that may allow our recruiters in our staffing offices to look at the work differently. I don't think it's going to replace, in my opinion, I don't see it replacing a recruiter because I think we're in the people business and people like to deal with people. You think there will be some interesting enhancements that come along. I think a blockchain is one of them being something that could be really incredible just from, I know somebody said to me, hey, it's on the candidate to load their entire, work history and compliance documents, and blockchain allows to do that. I think that's great. So I think we need to look at it as more of enhancement and that it's going to enhance the work that we do, not replace it.
Great feedback. And we are almost at time. So we are going to wrap up. Again, if you submit a question, I promise we'll get back to you with an answer. So thank you. Feel free to send them for the next few minutes. Want to extend a huge, huge thank you to our sponsor, Worksome. It has been so incredible to work with Worksome throughout this webinar and while we're prepping. I absolutely have gained so many takeaways. So thank you. And thank you, Natalie from Snowflake. We appreciate you both being here and sharing your words of wisdom with us. So here's the links, and these will be provided in the slide decks to some of the surveys that we referenced in this presentation today. So please check them out. There's a lot of really good data, some fun facts in there, and hopefully some takeaways that you'll be able to share with your organization. And lastly, thank you. Thanks, everyone. We're going to send these slides out typically within 48 hours following this webinar, and the replay will be available as well for our council members. We'll get back to your questions, and I appreciate everyone being here this afternoon. I hope you have a really good day and a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Us. Thank you.